Howdy, folks. Welcome to another episode of The Inciting Incident. I'm your host, Tim Shields. Funny story about my next guest. I was watching One Giant Rock with two friends of mine about a couple weeks ago, and the opening segment has this person freediving. And I literally said to my friends, I said, what kind of psycho does that? I want to know that mind. And then lo and behold, my next guest, William Trubridge, shows up in my inbox the next day, who is the world record holder of freediving. So with that said, let me get to his bio and then we'll jump into it. William Trubridge is a renowned New Zealand freediver celebrated for his remarkable achievements. Having relocated with his family from Northumberland, England to New Zealand at about 18 months old, it's where his love of the ocean was birthed. By the age of 8, he was already showcasing an early prowess for underwater exploration to depths of 15 meters. That's almost 50 feet. In 2003, at the age of 23, Trubridge embarked on formal freediving training, which in 2005 led him to Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas, one of the deepest known underwater sinkholes in the world. This location would become pivotal in his career, serving as both his primary training ground and the venue for the annual Vertical Blue competition, which he himself founded. Trubridge's dedication culminated in multiple world records, notably in 2010 when he became the first person to descend to 100 meters, that's 328 feet, unassisted and without fins. In 2016, he extended the record to 102 meters, 334 feet, unaided on one single breath. In the same year, he set a free immersion record by reaching 124 meters. Guess how many that is, kiddos? 406 feet. To give you some context, the Statue of Liberty is 305 feet tall, and due to erosion, the Great Pyramid of Giza is about 455 feet tall. Beyond his competitive feats, Trubridge is an advocate for ocean conservation. In 2019, he completed an underwater crossing of New Zealand's Cook Strait, undertaking 934 breath hold dives over 9 hours and 15 minutes to raise awareness for the endangered Hectors and Maui dolphins. He is the founder of Vertical Blue, the most prestigious freediving event in the world, held annually in Dean's Blue Hole. And he's also a keynote speaker. William talks about how he neutralizes stress and fear in the deepest dives, how to go below the surface of consciousness to access our intuition and creativity, and how all of these states relate to the mental immune system. We have a lot to unpack here. So I'm going to start with the first question that I usually ask everybody, and that is, who were you, where were you, and did you have any idea what you wanted to do with your life when you were 17 years old?
When I was 17, not a clue. I mean, I did have an idea, but it was the wrong idea. Back then, I was interested in genetics, interesting enough, and it was kind of a hot topic. Back then, I had a passion for biology, so I went to university and studied genetics, worked for 1 year as a genetic engineer in a lab before I realized that it wasn't for me. So went traveling, and that's where I kind of discovered freediving.
Where did you travel and how old were you when was that like your gap year?
Yeah, we call it an OE in New Zealand, so overseas experience. And most of us end up going to London, to England, because it's easy to work there. So I went to London, worked for a year at a hotel, doing kind of weekend trips to Europe in that time and saving up money. And at the end of it, went to the Caribbean, to Belize and then Honduras to try out this sport of freediving that I'd heard about. And as soon as I tried it, I was like, this is me. It kind of ticked every box. And most importantly, it challenged me mentally and physically. Everything I'd done up to that point was either in one of those two boxes, but not both. Like I played chess as a kid, which is just mental. At university, I rowed, played other sports, which were mostly physical. But freediving is a kind of a holistic challenge, and it's a spiritual discipline at the same time. You really have to be grounded and aware of who you are in order to perform at a high level.
So in one regard, the inciting incident was you taking off to travel and you found sort of this beautiful thing that you wanted to explore on this journey.
Yeah. I wound up on an island off the coast of Honduras and was going out kind of every day, morning and afternoon, with the dive boats, the scuba boats. Back then, freediving wasn't really known. So I was the only one on the island who was doing it. And I'd go out with them and go off by myself, which is the worst thing you can do. It's like super dangerous. And I'm glad I survived that period somehow. But I was just kind of diving on the reef and exploring myself and my own kind of capacity for being an aquatic creature at the same time as I was exploring the underwater world, and spending most of the daylight hours in or under the water. And that's where it really kind of, it came home. As a kid, that was our lives, right? Because I lived on a boat that my family sailed from Europe to get to New Zealand when we left when I was 1 and arrived when I was 5. So my earliest memories are of that kind of an existence where the sea is everything. It's your highway, it's your school, it's your grocery store, it's your playground, and it's kind of a natural place to be. So for me, when I found freediving, it was kind of just like coming home.
I think when I was my first kind of solo adult trip, I had a relationship and a job end in the same week. And the girl was like, I need time and space. So I disappeared for 5 days. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I bought a one-way ticket to Tanzania. I'm going to volunteer at an orphanage. And at the end of it, I wound up in Zanzibar. And this girl was super into scuba diving. So I'm like, I'm going to get my scuba diving training. And, it was like first day you're in the shallow end. The next day you're going down. And I'm forcing myself down the line. The pressure is super intense. But I don't know anything about regulating really. So I just let go and I start swimming and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. All of a sudden I got vertigo and I just started going down and I'm like, doing the sign and the guy brings me up to the top and my eyes are freaking out. He's like, just stare at the horizon. And so that was the extent of my, underwater aquatic world. I wound up meeting the driver and buying some weed and hanging out with the girls on the side of the beach the rest of the time. So I'm intrigued by this world, but I'm also slightly terrified of it. So I want to ask this question of you. This is something you said, you're familiar with who Dr. Zach Bush is, right?
Vaguely, yes.
Okay. So, he was a triple board certified doctor, and one of them was hospice care. And it's very rare for this to happen, but on one night, 3 people came back from the dead, and they all said the same thing. They all said, why did you bring me back? I felt so accepted. So in your TED Talk, you said that you felt at a certain threshold, you felt accepted by the ocean. What does that mean?
It's an experience, I guess, that we're anthropomorphizing onto the ocean, because what's happening is in the descent, we have to swim down to overcome our buoyancy. So on the surface, we float, but at depth, the pressure crushes the lungs into a smaller size, so you lose that buoyancy. And at a certain point, which for me is around 15, 20 meters, I become negatively buoyant. And so I stop swimming soon after that and can still free fall at about the same speed that I was swimming. And that free fall gets faster and faster. So at the beginning, it kind of feels disconcerting because you're rapidly kind of plummeting into the abyss. But the key to performance and freediving, the key to really excelling, is to see that as a kind of acceptance. The ocean is welcoming you in, welcoming you deeper. So that's how I perceive it now. And now I don't even need to go that deep in order to have that sensation whenever I'm in the water. It just feels kind of like a natural place to be. There's a lot of peace to it. There's such a ethereal, otherworldly experience to the day-to-day lives we have above the surface. So yeah, it's really, really welcoming.
I was getting anxiety in my heart, like thinking about that going down. But I do remember that moment before I got vertigo. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. This is a completely different world, a weightless world. And you're just free to be in another dimension almost.
And we can go deeper into that if you're interested, because not just the weightlessness. There's other parts to it that put you into this kind of really intimate contact with what is in your core, which is just consciousness with no trammels to it, nothing added. And only in freediving have I had that experience so distilled because of what it adds to the experience.
Do you meditate at all?
I try to, and I've kind of off and on had it as part of my practice. But in order for me to get into that kind of a state in meditation, I'll be lucky if I can get there in kind of 20 or 30 minutes on the mat, right? Whereas in a free dive, it can take 20 or 30 seconds or less. And in the most intense experiences in a free dive, it goes far beyond anything I've ever experienced meditating or above the surface. And I think it's part of that is the practice, and part of that is what's happening with the water. Because when you spoke about the weightlessness, right? And when you're completely weightless, and you can have this experience actually floating in a float tank where it's a salty solution, and so you float on the surface, and it's kind of like a pod that's sealed with no sound, no light at all. And so when you're floating there, you're completely weightless. And if that is prolonged, then it completely takes away the sensation of having a body, because we don't realize it, but we are constantly reminded that we have a body by the fact that we have our weight on the chair or on our feet, or the kind of the movement of air around us. Those kind of things just kind of put us define us in physical space, right? But underwater, in complete weightlessness, everything is uniform around you. And so your body dissolves into that uniformity. There's no difference in the sensation that's coming from your hand, your foot, your arm. And so everything's the same. And so it disappears, if that makes sense.
100%.
So you actually, and this experience I get the strongest in dives that aren't necessarily deepest dives, but where I go to an intermediate depth for freediving, like 50 or 60 meters, and I hang at that depth. So I'm just very still. I'm either resting on the sandy bottom or I'm locked onto the rope in a certain way. And after a few moments of this weightlessness, the sensation of having a body disappears. But that's just the first step, because what also happens is that our sensation of time disappears with the lack of breathing. Something else that we don't maybe realize is that the breath is this kind of natural metronome that we have for measuring time. And so when we're doing something kind of strenuous, our breathing and our heart rate accelerates. When we're relaxed, it slows down, and time kind of follows along with the same pattern. So in those moments, like, time can kind of get condensed or extended. And when you are underwater with your breath suspended, it feels like time also is suspended, like you're outside of time in the same way that your body is outside of space. And that sends you, with the lack of anything kind of external, sends you inside and internally into yourself, and puts you into intimate contact with your own thoughts and your own awareness. But then another thing that happens is that your thoughts themselves, because there's no data coming in, there's no stimuli for them to process, right? There's no sounds. Light is just this kind of muted, dark blue color, nothing coming from your extremities. So there's no data coming to your awareness and nothing for it to process. And the effect of the pressure and the narcosis of the gases also dilates those spaces between thoughts. So you eventually get into that kind of what they call samadhi state in yoga, where your mind is completely empty. And it's hard to obviously tell how long that lasts for, but at least long tracks of time can be spent in this completely state of kind of suspended animation, where there's no thoughts, no sensation of having a body. You feel like you're outside of space and time. And then all that's left in that state, all that's left is the only thing that you really are, which is the consciousness that's receiving all of that data normally. And so without all the noise, without all the information that's coming to the consciousness, You become just that speck of awareness, just that consciousness adrift in the abyss. And you have this kind of intimate contact with it, and you realize that that's all you are, that everything else is an affectation, like your thoughts, your emotions. We're not actually experiencing those. Those are part of the contents to the awareness that's coming to us in the same way that my voice is coming to you, or the lights, the sounds that we're experiencing. It's all data. And in the center of it, all we really are is just that speck of consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the meditation practice as well. When you get beyond time and space, when you get beyond all of that input that's coming in through the sensory experiences, you're just in this infinite field of awareness. You are a point of awareness inside of this infinite field of information awareness. So when you are in that space, do you, like for me as a writer, when I get to that space, it's basically trance, but I tap into like a river of information and it's just coming in. So are you just pure emptiness down there, or are you receiving information about, the nature of your life, the nature of consciousness, the ocean?
Yeah, good question. Down there, I would have to say it's more of a kind of a pure state. There's nothing injected into that. But knowing how to access that, just knowing that it exists is the first step, knowing that is what you really are. And then being able to return to that in moments, even above the surface, is something that helps you access what I think you're talking about, which is the creativity that comes from deeper within the subconscious, which has a much quieter signal. And so you need to be able to kind of take away all these external noise and information and thoughts in order to be able to hear that signal that's coming from your deep creativity and subconscious. And so, for me, freediving has been a vehicle to be able to replicate that state in day-to-day life. And then that has enabled me to kind of benefit from it in the ways that you're talking about, I think.
Yeah. So in my new book, Dream Tethering, I say sort of the practice is a way to carve out a path to God. And so this practice eventually becomes completely innate. Innate and second nature. But when you're down there, obviously you are kind of one with the water and one with the ocean. But does fear ever seep in there?
Typically, it might sound kind of brash for me to say so, but typically it doesn't. I do have to deal with fear, but it's more before the dive begins. That's the moment where it's most pivotal, and where the fear is at its peak. And then it's more just kind of a fear of failure rather than a fear of going deep. Like I'm not scared of being at depth or of my own kind of potential underwater. It's a fear of coming to the surface and not quite making it. So coming to the surface and blacking out or having a failed dive. Wow. I assume that's happened? It has, yes. In a sport where we are pushing the limits, then every so often you're going to push them a little bit too far. Luckily, in the sport, it's a benign occurrence, because as long as you have safety divers, they will bring you to the surface if you're still under, and you don't have any water that enters the lungs. You have a very strong reflex that stops that happening. And so once you're above the surface, you then have nerves that detect the fact that you are above the surface again, and you spontaneously resume breathing. There's ways that can be accelerated as well. So in most cases, like if you're going to run out of oxygen, it's not going to be halfway through the dive when you're at depth. It's going to be right at the end if you've kind of screwed up a little bit. And so in that last zone, or the last kind of 100 feet, that's when our safety divers meet us and escort us up to the surface, so that if we should black out, if something happens, they can grab us and bring us to the surface at the same speed that we would have swum ourselves. How do they know if you've blacked out or not? You can tell. The body goes limp? Yeah, the body goes. Typically, the first thing that happens is that you start to kind of lose focus in the eyes, and they'll be like paying very close attention. They'll know if it's coming. And then the sign that it's happening is like bubbles will start coming out of the mouth. You'll start losing air, and your movements will become more and more erratic and then stop completely.
Yeah. So yeah, in my first book, A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment, I bought a one-way ticket to India after my mom passed away. And I didn't have a plan or a clue or anything. And I was I almost had a breakdown on the way to the airport. My sister was driving. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this? Blah, blah, blah. Like my mind was reeling. What I've learned throughout that year of traveling is like, when you jump, the net always appears. So what is kind of the thought process when you're at the edge of the boat and you're about to jump? Like, what do you have to tell yourself? What do you have to go through?
You have to trust the process. Obviously, I'm not attempting a dive that I don't think that I could achieve. We have to be very conservative in our approach. And so I'm building up very slowly in training. I've come very close to that world record depth or maybe even exceeded it. And so I'm confident in my ability to achieve it. It's just about performing on the day. And then the main kind of obstacle or adversary is your own mind and the kind of nervous state that we can get into because of the anticipation of a performance. And in most sports,
which is a state of contraction. So how do you expand yourself?
Yeah. So in most sports, you can actually channel that into a better performance, right? Like a boxer uses the adrenaline, uses the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system in order to hit harder, to kind of get more blood flowing to their muscles and everything. And it's the same in sprinting and probably most sports. But in freediving, as you can probably imagine, you have to be relaxed in order to perform. We have to be oxygen efficient, like using the least amount of oxygen molecules to cover X number of meters. Otherwise, you're going to black out. So it's all about entering into a relaxed, peaceful state and therefore activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. And so there's various different techniques that we can use to do that, which revolve around the breathing and certain mental techniques. Some of them that we've already kind of gone into, which is just recognizing that you are not your thoughts, that your thoughts themselves are just data information that's coming to your awareness. So even if I have a thought in my last breath, like this is the last breath you're going to take, or you're going to die down there, or just the worst possible thought that you could imagine as you're taking a final breath to try and dive to 300 feet, then instead of letting that affect me, I can recognize that thought is just more data that's coming to my attention and just let it come in the front door and go out the back door without sitting it down to tea kind of thing. And these techniques are perhaps unique to the sport of freediving, or amongst sports, they're unique. But when you think about it, they're techniques that we really need, like for our day-to-day lives. This is the kind of system that we need to be able to activate, right? Because most of the stress that we experience in our lives doesn't benefit from the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. It used to be the case when we were cavemen, sure, like if you meet a saber-toothed tiger coming around the path, then you need to be able to either run away very quickly or fight it. And most of the stress and situations we got into were helped by that response. Nowadays in our lives, stress, anxiety revolves around interpersonal relationships, work, marriage, families, all this stuff. And in none of that do we benefit from getting kind of riled up and angry or aggressive, right? So what I found is that the techniques of freediving transpose into day-to-day life in a way that's so powerful. And freediving is kind of like this test tube experiment in the most extreme form of stress management, because there's nothing, with very few exceptions, maybe burning alive or something else, where you have this kind of visceral, existential urge to breathe that's not in your lungs, it's not in any one locus, it's just the whole kind of organism is crying out for air. And to be able to feel that and respond to it with relaxation requires the maximum amount of control. And so that's why it's this kind of like test tube laboratory experiment in managing that stress. And if it works there, it can work anywhere.
Wow. That's mind blowing. So I guess if I had to distill my own work, it would be surrender and trust, because that's what I'm trying to master in this life. And I sort of, in the last draft of this new book, I was actually talking to my 17-year-old self. And I was like, I'm going to save you a lot of time and effort and struggle to tell you the central question of your life. And this is the central question of my life. Am I powerful enough? Do I believe in myself to become the creator, the executor, and the master of the dream? So I'm trying to do that through surrender and trust. What are you trying to master in this life? Or what is the central question of your life do you think you're trying to solve?
Wow. That's going very deep. I think it's about, finding out who I am and what I'm capable of. I used to think that it was my kind of life's purpose to discover human aquatic potential. How aquatic are we as a species? How deep can we go? How much can we assimilate into the underwater world? And it's that, but even kind of in a more meta layer, it's about just finding out what we're capable of in general, like because freediving is not the last thing that I'm going to do. It's a sport that I'm applying myself to now, but now I also have a family, and that comes with all kinds of challenges, and there'll be a new kind of career that I'm evolving towards from freediving. So that will open up all sorts of other difficulties and paths. And so it's about, just for me at least, trying to apply myself to each of these new challenges and do so in a way that reveals the utmost of my potential.
Is that new career going to be teaching this stuff? Because you have a pretty profound body of life experience that a lot of people could benefit from. I mean, the breath being the number one thing. The majority of people on the planet, including myself, I'm sure, don't know how to breathe properly. And the breath is life.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the way I see it is these two kind of defenses that we have. The breath being one of them, but the mind being the other one. And if you don't have both of those working in unison, then the challenges, the stress, the pressure that we are exposed to is going to seep in through the other half. So you can't, the breath by itself is not enough, because the mind can still go off on its, down the garden path and get rampant. And likewise, if you're just solving these problems through thinking, the nervous energy can go into your body. So you need both systems. And this is actually the two halves of what I call the mental immune system, where
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so it's a physical and a mental defense against pressure, against stress and anxiety in our life. But there's a third aspect to it, which I think is really the game changer. And that borrows on the power of the subconscious mind that we talked about. And it involves programming these techniques into the subconscious mind, basically outsourcing the work to the subconscious, so that you don't need to remember or choose to do these techniques in the moment, which is never going to work. Like, if we're honest about it, in the heat of the moment, what are we going to do? We're going to go back to the old way. We're going to get angry or do whatever we'd normally do in that situation.
That's why the practice is so important.
Absolutely.
Right?
And the practice is a way of reprogramming the subconscious mind. And it actually doesn't take, if it's done in the right way, which involves kind of taking on small challenges, very kind of achievable ones, then you can reprogram, you can rescript your response to pressure and stress in very short order. And it becomes more and more powerful the more it's used, because there's a positive feedback loop to it. So that's the real game changer. And the moment when you realize, and it's happened to me, it happens to me all the time now, I'll be in a situation and I'll just notice that my breathing has changed. It's a little bit more grounded, more in my belly, which is part of the nasal diaphragmatic breathing we use. And I'll notice that mentally I've kind of detached myself a little bit. It's almost as if I'm on the other side of soundproof glass. And I noticed this before I noticed that the situation I'm in is like a shitty, stressful one. And so it's proof to me that these two halves of the mental immune system have kicked in automatically as a response to the stimulus of stress without me having to order that to happen, order that change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so of course. You've made it automatic because of your practice, and your awareness is almost outside of yourself, being the observer of the situation, either before or as the situation is unfolding.
And that's why we call it the immune system, because just like a physical immune system that protects us against viruses and bacteria, it would never work if we have to tell it, like, okay, guys, we've got a cut on our forearm, go and like spread some antibodies around there. I feel like I'm coming down with a virus. Okay, this is what we need. It has to be automatic for it to work. And the same thing against the virtual cerebral viruses that we're exposed to, which often come from our minds, like, I'm not good enough, I'm never going to do that, this is going to suck. All those kind of negative pressure that we exert on ourselves. We have to be able to respond to that automatically with an immune system that works behind the scenes so that we can get on with the actual performing what we need to do in that situation, whether it's an argument or public speaking or a meeting. You need to be using your prefrontal cortex for that activity rather than trying to manage the background stress and anxiety that's being caused.
I love that. I've never heard that term before, but it makes complete sense. The mental immune system. So what does, to go back to the surrender and trust thing, you talked about surrender and free diving, but what does that really mean to you? And then how does that translate above the surface in your life as well?
Yeah. In a free dive, you have to surrender to that feeling of the free fall and being accepted and drawn deeper into it. But you also have to surrender to this notion that it's without end, that if you're expecting at a certain point the free fall to end, that you're going to get to an objective, then you're going to be kind of in a state of slight alert or like looking out or expectation for that. Time's not going to pass as easily. You're just going to be slightly more elevated, therefore consuming more oxygen, therefore less likely to achieve your goal. And so when I enter that free fall, I tell myself, just shut down. And I absolutely kind of embrace the idea that that's it, that it's not that I'm going to my death or anything, but it's just that this state that I'm in has no ending to it. Then I have like a alarm set on my depth gauge, which kind of wakes me up out of that reverie at a certain depth close to God. But up until that moment, I'm just absolutely surrendered to the state of deepest relaxation possible. And I need to do that in order to be able to stand a chance of succeeding in the record attempt. And so, yeah, having faith in the process, having faith in yourself, and surrendering to that is a huge part of day-to-day life as well. And as you said, when you take the jump, the net appears, like fortune favors the brave, right? So it is a difficult step to take, but it's part of life. It wouldn't be so rewarding if it wasn't so challenging.
Yeah. I grew up playing soccer. It paid for my college and everything like that. I've taken to tennis, in the last 4 years obsessively. And tennis, soccer's a team sport. Tennis is such a mental sport. And I've really come to observe that I can see my mind, I can see the change in my mind the split second before I hit that shot. And it goes to the net or it goes out every single time. So it's such a mental sport. And this is, of course, I have an opponent. And yes, you have an external world record you're trying to break, but this is completely you against yourself. So what is it in you that drives you to do that?
Yeah, I loved watching tennis as well. And I'm watching it like yourself, not just for the physical battle on the court, but you can see that mental struggle going on in the opponents. And it's incredible watch it play out. And in my sport, how does that drive me? It's
because it's just you against yourself.
Yeah, I think when we because sometimes it's not. Sometimes in competition, I'm going to be trying to win the gold medal or dive deeper than someone else. And in those moments, I inevitably don't perform as well. So when it is a purely internal discipline and just trying to discover what you're capable of yourself, I thrive on that more, I feel. And I'm no less motivated. Like I don't need a rival in order to egg me on. For me, it's more of kind of like it's less of a sport and more of an exploration. And so in the same way that Everest was enough for Edmund Hillary to be motivated to climb to the top, for me, the ocean's just being there is all the incentive I need to try and go as deep as we can.
I would say it's also an art form, because I'm sort of rewriting, and I was just working on it this morning, but I would describe an art as a way of being in the world. So, it is both an art, and then when you distilled it, like you said, you do your best when you are just focused on your human potential, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get clouded by rivalries, it's basically ego at the end. Like trying to beat someone else is more of an egotistical thing. And so the kind of the pure pursuit of just whatever your potential capacity is seems to be a better approach, at least for the sport.
So what do you see next for yourself? Are you still competing?
Yes, still training. I've had a couple of setbacks in the last recent years with injuries or medical stuff, but training very hard now, and in base training, my results are very promising. So I'd like to go deeper, but also it's also about trying to kind of distill the messages or the learnings that I've been lucky enough to receive from the ocean and transmit those to people who may also have difficulty with pressure in their lives, other kinds of pressure. And so that I feel like is my next big calling, is to try and contribute, because we have like this, it's pretty much a pandemic now of mental health issues that was bad enough before COVID, but was really catalyzed by COVID itself. And I see that there's different ways of combating that. A lot of those revolve around drugs, which have pretty powerful kind of secondary effects to them as well. And so, I know that there is benefit to many people using these techniques that of the mental immune system that we talked about. That doesn't come with any drawback, because you're curing or you're helping what's happening internally with something that is also internal. You're not taking a substance from elsewhere. And so it's a long-lasting, it's an enduring solution, and it's a completely natural one that doesn't come with any contraindications. So I feel like there's so much value to that, and I'd love to kind of diffuse those techniques to as many people as possible.
COVID, if you're just listening to this, I'm throwing air quotes up there. Everybody was afraid of this virus, but I think the more deadly thing was the mind virus that was going on, which is fear. And what's a better way to keep people in control than fear? It's almost like this whole, our media, this actually external dimension we are controlled through the amygdala, which is, the fight or flight and all this stuff. So I think you're in like the perfect space for the perfect time, because, the world is hungry for this information, and there is an expansion of consciousness that is occurring that people, I don't think it can be stopped. So everybody's going to be looking for it in their own sort of vertical. And I think the more teachers that are out there talking about this, the more the collective consciousness can expand at a rapid state. So I love what you're doing. And it kind of ties into another question. Do you hang out with a lot of other free divers?
Of course, yeah, all the time.
Okay.
And because we train together and we have to safety each other, and then we
Okay.
compete at the same events.
So are they like cerebrals such as yourself? Do they view this as sort of an exploration of consciousness, or are they sort of more in the 3D kind of world?
Yeah, a lot of them do. So freediving definitely attracts people who are interested in exploring that side, and I think they're more likely to continue with it as well. So there's a big contingent who share similar approach. Not everyone, of course, but remarkably quite a high amount.
Are they all kind of scientific minded if you're sort of counting oxygen molecules and stuff like that? I mean, or is that just you chose to go down this rabbit hole because it's expanding your awareness of the sport and of yourself?
I guess I came at it from a scientific approach because that's my background in education. And there's not everyone holds a similar stance, but you do need a little bit of that because at the end of the day, there's more questions about freediving in the sport than there are answers. And so we have to be able to kind of investigate ourselves and what our body is capable of underwater in a scientific way. If not, you're just kind of throwing darts in the dark, really. So it does, benefit from a little bit of a dose of science, I think.
Yeah. So you live in the Bahamas and you train at Dean's Blue Hole, which is over 660 feet deep. Have you ever looked down there and sort of felt it calling you deeper? Or, I mean, you probably have to be very disciplined about when that timer goes off. You're like, I'm actually a human. I have to be back up on the surface.
Yeah. And we have redundant safety systems. So I'm diving next to a line and actually clipped onto the line with a running carabiner so that my safety team, if necessary, could pull up that line and me at the end of it. And so we set the plate, which is the end of the line, at the target depth for that day. So even if I chose to during the dive, I would not be able to exceed that depth. So there's many different kind of safety systems like that, which render the sport pretty safe, especially compared to other extreme sports.
So what about, and maybe this doesn't occur because you're not breathing, but when you're scuba diving and you come up too fast, you get the bends or something like that. If the team's taking you up fast, the last 15 meters or something, do you have to deal with that? Or if you haven't watched his TED Talk and have seen what he's capable of doing with his body, it's pretty extraordinary. When you pulled your stomach in, it's like, you're like a emaciated New York runway model or something like that. When you are able to control your body like that, it's incredible.
Yeah, that control is really, really important in order to tolerate the pressure at depth. So if you imagine at 100 meters, the pressure is about 3 or 4 times what it is inside a car tire. And your lungs are crushed to the volume of just a couple of oranges. So you have to be very flexible in your diaphragm, your thorax, your trachea, everything in order to accommodate that pressure. But regarding the speed of ascent, that's not actually so much of an issue for freediving. We can get decompression sickness, the bends, if we do multiple deep dives. But in one dive, typically there's no risk because we're only taking one breath of air at the surface. So if you imagine a scuba diver, if they were to go to 100 meters and take one breath at 100 meters, that one breath has 11 times the amount of all the gases as it does compared to the breath that I've taken down from the surface because you're breathing it at that pressure. And so you get so much more nitrogen absorbed into the tissues. And then, yes, if you were to come up quickly, that nitrogen would come out like when you open the lid on a Coca-Cola bottle too quickly, and it would just make the blood frothy and all kinds of problems. But in freediving, yeah, it's a very small amount of the gases, and gas exchange actually stops taking place at a certain depth. So our exposure to the gases is limited.
Okay. So, I mean, I think, mastery is having the complete control over the domain of your mind, body, and spirit. So you have to work as this one singular point of awareness to be successful in this sport, right?
Yeah. It really, like, I often get asked the question, is freediving more mental or is it more physical as a discipline? And the only answer I can give is it's 100% of both. You cannot muscle your way down to 100 meters and back. Neither can you meditate yourself there and back. You have to have both those systems operating at their peak performance in order to have a chance of getting to that depth. And that's ultimately what's drawn me to the sport, because it's this kind of mental and physical holistic challenge.
So how do you, well, you may have said this, but let's just explore it again. How do you think our relationship with the ocean affects our understanding of ourselves?
Yeah, the ocean is an incredible place, an incredible force. And being down there at depth and experiencing that state of just pure consciousness, just a speck adrift in the blue, really brings home how small and insignificant we are. But at the same time, you get this kind of expansion where, because you don't have a body or a mind without the absence of sensations, the absence of thoughts, you have this expansion of that speck of consciousness so that it feels like you're not just local, you're everywhere. And if someone had kind of given me that description before I experienced it, I would have been like, another flowery kind of like woo-woo. But it really is that experience, like this non-local consciousness. And it's brought home also by the idea that, like, if that is what the only thing that we are, then there's no difference between my consciousness and yours. There's absolutely, like, any difference is something that's added on, like the emotional reaction that we have to things, or the thoughts we have about those things. Those are just contents that is coming to the awareness. The awareness at the center is just purely receiving. It's like a video camera that's filming in the theater in complete darkness. And there's no coloration to that. So if our consciousnesses are all identical, we're just having different experiences inside them, then at the end of the day, we are the same stuff. And Alan Watts describes this much more succinctly than I ever could, as saying we are basically the fabric and structure of existence itself. And that's kind of the experience that you have when everything else is taken away from consciousness, because you realize that there's nothing to it. There's no shape, no form, no color, nothing. And it's just receiving what's put into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. A, I love Alan Watts. B, I have this chapter in the new book called Why You Matter, Understanding Where the Fractal You Are. So you are just a fractal of this one awareness. You are a point of awareness having this experience so that the one can come to know itself.
And in the same way that, like, an alien who's looking down on the planet, well, if we look down, if I'm snorkeling and I look down, I see a big boulder of coral, right? I'd say, oh, that's a nice piece of coral. That coral is actually a colony of thousands or millions of different plants and animals living together in symbiosis. Like one coral polyp is an animal and a plant living together. And the whole coral head is this huge kind of city or colony of it. And yet it looks like one kind of single organism. And maybe in the same way, an alien who's looking down on Earth would say, oh, that's a nice Earth, or that's a nice planet, and not really kind of see a difference in these separate consciousnesses that we experience, but just see one kind of living organism that's interacting with itself in incredibly complicated and multifarious ways.
Yeah, I mean, I have a theory about that, we are this physical body is just this organized, energy field, which also is the Earth, but we are actually a planet starting at the mitochondria, which, is in the cells, which goes on up. So it's it's a never ending fractal from the very smallest to the very largest, aspects of the universe. I mean, this Earth, we could be a cell in a structure that we can't see or comprehend, but we matter because our consciousness matters.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the end of the day, like our bodies, like you say, the mitochondria was actually bacteria that was absorbed by a cell way, way, way back in evolution. And those two kind of like had a symbiosis at first and then just became the same thing. That's why we have separate DNA, mitochondrial DNA, because it came from a separate organism. And so we basically, like every cell is two creatures living in symbiosis, the same as a coral. And in our gut, we have more bacteria than we have cells in our entire body. So in a way, we are this kind of complex megalopolis of different organisms all living in a collaborative unit.
That blew my mind when I learned that mitochondria did not have human DNA. It's circular DNA, which is, I mean, we could go down, many paths with that. But so how did your I mean, it almost seems like a natural evolution, but maybe not everybody would do that. But how did your sort of passion for this sport evolve into ocean conservationism? And talk about some of the things that you're involved with now.
Yeah, so I think anyone who becomes a freediver can't not also become a steward of the oceans because it's our home, and you realize it's our home just as much as the land above the surface when you kind of interact with it in the way that a freediver does. And so to see the changes, to see things like coral bleaching, overfishing, plastic in particular, and see the impacts of those it's really tough. And so I've tried to do everything that I can in order to make an impact for those issues. It's been more difficult in the last few years because with the family I have drawn away to other priorities as well. But I want to try and give back, and every record attempt that I do is normally in support of some kind of ocean conservation cause. For instance, the plastic ocean or the Maoi's dolphins in New Zealand that are on the verge of extinction. So I try and kind of take the exposure from the record, which doesn't really have any utility for me, and transfer it over to something which is much more important.
So have you ever had sort of an experience of a merged or communication of consciousness with like a dolphin or some other sea creature?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me about that, because dolphins are so fascinating.
Especially the marine mammals. They are so smart. And the first ones were with the spotted dolphins in Bimini in the Bahamas, who will play with you for longer than you have appetite to play with them, like literally hours. And I've played games where they've welcomed me in to the little game that they were playing before I came along, which is, for instance, typically they'd play this with a leaf, but on this occasion, and sadly, they were using a piece of black plastic trash, and they would kind of swim along and catch it with one of their fins and swim with it, trailing off their fin for a little while, and then leave it and pass it to the next dolphin, who would whiz in and grab it and then do some pirouettes and then pass it to the next person. We call it like underwater rugby for dolphins. And after a certain point, I was swimming with them and trying to keep up and trying to play this game. And they let me, like they would take the plastic, swim with it, and then come in front of me and leave it and wait for me to pick it up and continue swimming. And that was the most magical experience. It was just as the sun had gone over the horizon, that incredible light in the water. And I was there with this group of just maybe 4 or 5 dolphins playing this little game in the water. Wild dolphins.
That's incredible. That is so wild. Was there ever any sort of like transmission of communication, or you just felt that sort of brethren with them?
That was more of just welcome into the group and this kind of camaraderie and fraternity. I guess there was a moment of communication that I had, or just a moment of the deepest level of empathy, which was with a whale, with a humpback whale in French Polynesia. It was a mother who was swimming with her calf, and I'd been diving for over a month, filming a French film where we were pretty much every day, spending every day in the water with the whales. But it wasn't until after the shooting had finished and we went off just for a couple of days to enjoy time by ourselves before flying out. And on the last dive, or the last day, I was the only one who kind of wanted to get into the water again. We saw some whales in the distance, but the visibility wasn't so good. And we're like, okay, well, I'll just go and see what they're doing. And swam kind of fairly near to them. It's a mother and her calf, but didn't want to kind of encroach on them. And so just kind of like swam parallel, but at a big distance. And gradually I noticed that the distance was becoming shorter and shorter. And I'm very, like, I have enough spatial awareness to know that it wasn't me that was the one who was getting closer to them. It was definitely the case that these two dolphins, the mother and the calf, were swimming closer and closer to me, to the point where I had the mother swimming right next to me. The calf was on the other side. And her eye was less than, it was like forearms distance away. Like right there. And she had positioned herself there so that she could look at me and look into my eyes. And there was such an incredible recognition of our mutual existence. Shakespeare says, Shakespeare says the eyes are the window to the soul. And looking into their eye, there was no mistaking the fact that there was a conscious entity that was studying me, kind of like thinking about me and trying to maybe imagine what it would be like to be me. Just, you could see that there was like everything was portrayed in that beautiful dark blue eye. And that was probably to this day one of the most extraordinary experiences I've had in the sea.
This is sort of a sidebar, but you've dove in Bimini. Did you ever dive along the Bimini Road?
I did, and I've also researched that a little bit, and it seems like it's a natural phenomenon. It doesn't seem like it's
really
requires any explanation beyond that. Yeah, those kind of flat rocks do form quite a bit in the Caribbean, and for them to be laid out, it's not really kind of like, it doesn't look like a road. I think it takes a little bit of fancy to imagine that there was some kind of a city in that spot.
So what do you wish more people knew about the ocean?
Wow. I wish that more people would know that it's our home, that we can assimilate, like just in the space of one lifetime, we can kind of evolve back to become marine creatures, just like our ancestors were going back millions of years. And that we can discover more about ourselves by immersing ourselves in the water. That reveals so much about who we really are, as well as being an incredible experience, right? Because if you think about it, we spend all our lives grounded on this boundary layer. Like we're either on the boundary between solid and gas or liquid and gas. Even water sports, if you're swimming, if you're playing water polo, surfing, kayaking, sailing, you're on that boundary between the water and the air, the liquid and the air. And only in freediving, only in diving, are we in complete immersion in a different medium, something that's not gas. And we're not grounded to a boundary. You're like in complete suspension. Every direction is the same. And that experience is so different to what we encounter in our day-to-day lives when we're like trotting along on this boundary level between the solid and the gas, that it opens so much to that experience. Like it reveals so much about us, about our planet, about where we came from, about the universe, like about our potential, everything. And so I really think that everyone should see the ocean as part of our home and a place that it's natural to be and that they can learn so much from.
I mean, to go back to the fractal, 70% of the earth is water, and then 70% of us are water. There's got to be some sort of connection there. So then to drill down, I'll just two more questions for you. To drill down a little bit more, what has freediving taught you personally about life above the surface?
Yeah, freediving has taught me about the power of those techniques we mentioned earlier. The power of being able to be in the midst of the maelstrom, the midst of the mess, the confusion, the pressure, the stress, anxiety, and to stay calm, to hold on to your center. And what that opens up to you, because if you can stay calm in those situations, you can perform so much better. You can better extricate yourself from them if that's what's required, or thrive and prosper in them if that's what is required. And so it starts from being able to stay grounded, stay calm, and to a certain extent, I guess, we need pressure in our lives. We have to recognize that it's never going to go away. We can't live a life that's stress-free or anxiety-free, and we wouldn't want to. But at the same time, we have to have the faculty in order to neutralize the effects of that pressure on us so that we can operate, we can perform to our highest level in those scenarios.
It's called resilience. You're building resilience in your life, which you need resilience to survive. So you surface from a world record. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Take that breath of air. You see the sky.
Often I'll maybe burst out laughing, or just have kind of a quiet moment to myself, or I'll high five my safety divers. Yeah, I never know what's going to happen, but there's a moment of relief. And then there's this kind of effect where you feel like you're coming out of a dream, like in the same way that you wake up in the morning and you remember the last thing that happened in a dream. And then from that, you remember the thing that happened before that. You kind of work your way back, remembering the dream. It's like you're opening it up as you go. The same way, looking back on a free dive, you might remember just one detail from it. And then that reminds you of something else that happened in the free dive. And that way you can kind of like recreate the whole experience of it. But it really is this dreamlike state that we're in during the free dive. And so when you surface, you're in a way waking up. You could see it as being kind of reborn as well. But it's a definite like distinction between what happens below.
I love that because this life is actually the dream. This is the illusion. You learn to become the lucid dreamer, and then you can control the course of your life. But you said you laugh when you got to the surface, and last Saturday I was rewriting this chapter. And I was just sitting there laughing. What was coming out of me? I'm like, I can't fucking believe this is coming through me right now. Mm-hmm. You just become the vehicle for this stream of consciousness. And yeah, I was just laughing like, this is crazy. Like me, I'm bringing this into the world, but I don't think it is me. I'm just learned to become that sort of stream of information. I call it code breaking in the new book because, I was running along the beach in Gearhart, Oregon one day, and my mission statement came in, and I translate light, frequency, and energy into story so as to lead others to their truth. But so I guess the last question I want to ask you is, what do you hope your legacy will be?
I hope that the things we talked about, like if I'm able to transmit the beauty of the underwater world and what it can reveal and attract more people to that. And at the same time, if I'm able to help more people with difficulties that they experience in their lives, pressures, with the techniques that ultimately come from the ocean, and I'm just the vehicle that's passing them on, then yeah, either of those would be legacies that I'd be extremely proud of. So that's what I'm working towards now is trying to make those come true. But at the same time, I still have this appetite to go deeper, and I still have this kind of love of the sport and a hunger to define human aquatic potential. So that's always going to be there.
I don't think you'll ever lose that. Maybe at some point you won't be able to go so deep into the ocean, but the self is a never-ending labyrinth. and you will always be going deeper, because that is the nature of the unfolding of, I guess, biology or matter in this experience. So, this was awesome. I love it. I knew we would have a great conversation. I was really looking forward to you. William Trubridge, folks, check out his TED Talk. It's really fascinating. Where else can people find you?
So I have a website, which is just williamtrubridge.com. The mental immune system we talked about is mentalimmunesystem.com. I'm on socials with Will Trubridge or William Trubridge or something similar. And yeah, that's the main things, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah, I followed you on Instagram, so looking forward to continuing to follow along your journey. So thank you so much for giving your time and your wisdom to everybody. And hopefully we connect again in the future. And maybe I'll wind up in the Bahamas. I'm due for a trip, but
you definitely should.
I'm excited. I'm excited to see where your journey brings you.
Thanks, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, folks, if you like this, please share it, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. I keep saying it'll make my publishers happy. So, eventually it's a downward stream. So that'll make me happy. But anyway, until next time, check out William Trubridge. It was a pleasure. Take care, William.